Hello everybody, I'm Rene Ramos, director of the Lynn and Louis Wolfson II Florida Moving Image Archives, and this is Rewind, the show that looks back on Florida's past with historic film and video. It's time for another trip back into the past, so sit back, relax, and enjoy another episode of Rewind.
Air travel, once the prerogative of an affluent few who could afford to pioneer air routes to little-known resorts with colorful names, is today just another mode of transportation for some 130 million people who annually travel aboard American air carriers. So great is this demand for air travel, and so anxious are the airlines to provide the service, that today most of the nation's major air terminals are faced with a crisis. Almost overnight, it seems, passengers and planes have reached an unnerving peak. Airports are cluttered with jet-powered aerial armadas. Terminals echo the constant chatter of public address systems directing impatient throngs to and from the planes. And airport officials, caught off guard, worry over the wonder of it all. But as the air industry argues and adjusts, the passengers wait, sometimes bewildered by the delays and confusion, but nevertheless determined to fly.
Time and space, a jet age dilemma. Another in a series of FYI, for your information.
Roger, United 304, descend to flight level 180. 304 is out of 19 for 180.
At busy airports, such as JFK in New York City, planes in endless holding patterns circle already cluttered air corridors, while others, lined up by the dozen on taxi ramps, wait for the air traffic controllers to mingle them with their airborne counterparts without endangering either.
Position now. 351, heading 340, intercept the Yukon on 128 radio, climb to 10,000.
Whether you're on the ground or in the air, it's a point of irritation. Sometimes on the ground, the trip is running late due to weather, and with the traffic problems they have, the trip gets later and causes inconveniences not only to the passengers, it also is a safety problem due to crews maybe perhaps becoming overtired. The conditions that prevail with the major airports being overcrowded, the controllers, I think, do a tremendous job. I know as far as the flight crews are concerned, we're somewhat amazed at the good job that they do, considering the amount of traffic in and out, and especially under weather conditions.
5, clear for takeoff.
5.
11, position 13 right.
Position and hold.
23 up the takeoff, maintain heading 130 for Vectus.
Let's put the problem in the proper perspective. It is long known that under the forecasts of traffic growth by both government and industry, the traffic would increase at the rate of approximately 15% a year. From the airline side, we planned and acquired equipment to meet these growing demands from the government side. They did not vote enough funds. They did not allocate enough people to handle the traffic that obviously was coming. Now, there are two areas. One is in the airways, that is the airspace, and the other is in the area of the airports. As you know, we in the airline business, we furnish the airplanes, equipment to carry people. The government controls the airways, and the cities, municipalities, or port authorities under those cities and municipalities provide for the airport terminals. They are two separate and distinct problems, but as you might well imagine, interrelated. I think today that we in industry and in government do not want to face up to the real problem. I think that the government and the industry have engaged in some name calling. We tend to blame the cities for inadequate airports, the airlines for overscheduling, while the real problem lies in better airway traffic control system. More people, better and more sophisticated equipment. True, the airports are congested, but by no stretch of the imagination are they unable to handle the traffic today. Soon, they will not be able to.
Already, South Florida skies are as busy as those of New York. Last year, Miami ranked 6th among the nation's 12 busiest airports, with some 450,000 landings and takeoffs. Opa-locka, just a few miles to the north, set an even more active pace on its runways, recording more than 590,000 aircraft movements, making it the busiest air terminal in the country. Fort Lauderdale topped even Miami in its aircraft activities, finishing a very busy 5th, despite the fact its commercial aviation is only 1/4 of that handled by Miami. Tamiami Airport, built exclusively for general aviation, was 11th among the nation's busiest airports, moving some 382,000 planes on and off its runways. Add to this ever-growing air population, military aircraft, air cargo planes, and small planes from outlying airfields, and the conservation of airspace becomes an urgent matter. Keeping these aircraft apart and on course requires instantaneous management, and this is supplied by the Federal Aviation Administration.
015 to control 1150, National 94.
704, radar contact.
EASA 704, contact Miami approach control 118.1.
Raven, Miami approach control 118.1, yes, 704, thank you.
With traffic growing by leaps and bounds, like it is, generally a good round figure, about 28% per year, the air traffic congestion situation in the terminal areas of our large metropolitan areas is getting serious. The air traffic regulations are almost a daily thing of discussion. As the technology changes, so do the regulations and so do the procedures. These are constantly under review by committees, both intergovernmental committees and industry government committees that work on these continually to update them. So with this type of function, they will keep up with the technology of aviation.
Okay, Northeast 16, sending right to 015 for separation.
Okay. I'm up in the tower. We're trying to provide the most expeditious and orderly flow of traffic as possible. And in doing this, of course, you have to work closely with your companions in the tower. You've got to realize their capabilities Some do a better job than others. You have to keep this in mind. You have to consider the runways that you have available, your wind conditions, the type of traffic you're moving, whether it's air carrier traffic or general aviation traffic or a combination of both. We have to use a parallel runway system, which is relatively simple, whereby we land on one runway and we depart on the other. Then occasionally, when our traffic reaches a peak, we have to introduce a third runway, which occasionally will be a crossing runway. This poses more problems. You have to look at them as objects up there that you have to keep separated according to existing regulations, and try not to, and think about all the people that are involved. If you do this, I don't think that anybody could bear up under the pressure. I try and handle every flight like my wife and daughter were on the airplane. Question to make short approach now. I have jet traffic about 5 out of the...
On the ground here, we have extended the runways to almost the ultimate distance, so that we've got longer and better runways than we've had before. We are enlarging the terminal area in this new capital improvements program, but I think most important is the fact that we are getting underway the training transition airport that's about 35 miles west of this airport in the Everglades. And this will immediately take at least 140,000 plane movements from this airport, and that would open up it'll avoid the so-called saturation point. You have to bear in mind that these other airports, many of them don't permit local training flights in their pattern. But if you take, for instance, Kennedy Airport, Kennedy had 481,000 total operations in 1967, and we had 446,000. This is pretty close to being the same. Now, if we remove our local flights, then we should be able to handle minimum the amount of traffic that Kennedy handled without any trouble.
General aviation is going to have to sit down and organize among themselves and get together with the airlines and the FAA to work the problem. It's not a problem that can be solved by any one group. It's a tri-party problem, and that's the way it should be solved, in my opinion. It's a fact that there are over 110,000 registered aircraft in the United States, and less than 3,000 of these are airline aircraft. So certainly general aviation should have a voice in the controls that would be put on these airports, whether they be landing fees or some sort of other controls which would maybe narrow the number of people down that are using these main hubs. General aviation aircraft that go into the main airports such as New York and Chicago should be required to have some of the sophisticated systems which will help in separating aircraft, especially in cases of bad weather. I don't think that a radioless airplane should be allowed into Kennedy Airport to endanger any of the airline activity that's at that airport, but certainly a controlled general aviation aircraft with the proper equipment is not a hazard around the main airport.
Miami International Airport has a relatively low amount of general aviation, due primarily to the fact the Port Authority began to discourage it many years ago. Anticipating the air industry's growth, the Port Authority offered general aviation financially more desirable alternative facilities nearby. What few planes now use Miami International, few small planes, are for the most part executive aircraft. But the slack in air traffic caused by shifting general aviation is now being eaten up by a relative newcomer to the aviation industry, the air cargo carrier. Air freight, once very costly, is today becoming the fastest and most economical means of moving cargo from one city to another. Most of the air freight companies at Miami International are virtually working around the clock to move the thousands upon thousands of tons of cargo now pouring into the terminal from all over the world. Many experts believe that commercial and general aviation are not compatible, and that to conserve precious air space and unclutter air terminals, the two must be completely segregated.
Well, there are two schools of thought. One being that airports are built with taxpayers' funds, therefore anyone desiring to use the airport with a small airplane or a large airplane has as much right to use the airport as anyone else. The other school of thought being that if the airport becomes crowded, then an aircraft with 150 people on it should be given priority to land over an aircraft with 1 or 2 people. So far, the policy has been that aircraft first come, first serve, regardless.
From my personal point of view, I have never been in favor of legislating anyone out of any right. I am still of this same opinion. I do realize today, however, that it's becoming increasingly difficult to mix jet aircraft at 500 and 600 miles an hour with light aircraft at between 120 and 200 miles per hour, either in the airways or on the airports. I repeat, this is a fact, and I think sooner or later that the government and the industry must face up to it, and I believe that we will find these different types of aircraft separated, both on the ground and in the air.
I don't believe that you can segregate general aviation from public airports, and that public airports were built as a public convenience. Maybe a parallel might be segregating automobile traffic from a highway because it's reached its saturation point and only allowing bus traffic on. I think that the general aviation satellite airport system will help this. This should be developed, but I don't think that there should be mandatory rules obviating general aviation from using the main airports in the nation.
They have just as much right, we have to remember, in the airspace as the large fellow. This is based on the idea if you gave priority on your highways to the trucking interests and so forth. But we've been very fortunate here. The FAA gave us Opelika. We constructed, with FAA's assistance, the new Tamiami Airport. We have the Homestead General Aviation Airport, and we are now in the process of getting land and building another small general aviation airport out on US 27.
In South Florida, satellite airports are a proven asset to the air industry. And while obvious in purpose, these concrete reservations for small aircraft are not frowned upon by general aviation. But the problem of air congestion is not solved merely with the separation of commercial and general aviation.
First of all, I think they're going to have more airports. We're trying to do that ourselves. We're way ahead of the other outfits. For instance, we could, if we wanted to, land at the new Tamiami Airport this afternoon with 727s and 737s. The electronic setup has got to be, and every day it is being improved. The electronic navigational facilities and so forth, and that with the more airports and decongestion in the air, which is quite a thing. We think that these bigger airplanes will be flying much higher. That will open up certain other altitude levels that we don't have today. But it's going to have to be a teamwork operation from everybody connected with aviation.
Primarily, the problem is more airports. As we put it, more concrete. This is the problem in New York at the moment. Not enough airports. We do have some problems in keeping abreast of the growing traffic in facilities, in radars and in control towers, but we're working on that. A lot of things are being worked on. We are now almost ready to commission the first fully automated air traffic control center in the United States. This is at Jacksonville, Florida, where all of the information presented to the controller on his scope comes first of all by raw radar, then into digitizers, and then through computers, and is presented on the scope for the controller with all of the information on the target of the aircraft presented in front of him. They are working on such things as fully automated position reporting from aircraft, computerizing the flight of the aircraft, automating the air traffic control towers with radar put into computers and all the information presented on the scope to the controller, and fully automated sequencing of arrival patterns. All of this will help. It all takes time, takes money, takes techniques that are being developed.
If we are to move great volumes of traffic, however, and to meet the demands of the air commerce in this country, we're going to have to explore, and rapidly, the use of better and more sophisticated equipment for air traffic control. Today, we are handling it with what I best describe as Chinese labor. The controller must see, he must communicate with the pilot. There is no feedback between the control room and the cockpit of the aircraft except for the communications between the pilot and the controller. We must explore better systems similar to data link, where the pilot gets feedback from the computer as well as the controller to relieve him of some of the load, to make navigation more exacting, to be able to shorten up separations both in time and mileage, and to install better and more sophisticated equipment in the aircraft themselves to set up their own routes to where they can operate parallel at the same altitude. This hardware is available today.
The solution is going to come, especially around airports, and the use of airports should come by self-regulation of the airlines, their scheduling policies, and I certainly think it should come too from general aviation, maybe the encouragement of the use of satellite airport systems. I think rapid transit between the center points of the city and the various airports around the community would help this. In other words, making it just as convenient to go to, say, the new Tamiami Airport as it would Miami International by some form of rapid transit system. And I think this will come to the main airports first, and of course eventually will come to the satellite airports.
We've been very fortunate to be able to provide better general aviation facilities at other airports than this one. Now, they cost a lot of money, admittedly, but the airlines have agreed with us, and we have agreements with them whereby we underwrite the deficit from these general aviation airports from the Miami International Airport Fund. And as long as we can do that, we're in pretty good shape, because in the meantime, we're going ahead to build this 39 square mile airport, which will be, to my knowledge at the present time, it's the largest in the world. And this can be done, we're satisfied, without resort to tax funds of any kind.
Just 40 miles due west of the present terminal, Dade's Port Authority is breaking ground for a new multi-million-dollar jetport. By October of next year, jet aircraft on training flights will be touching down on what was once an Indian ceremonial ground. In an area of the Everglades larger than the city of Miami, and presently better suited to airboats rather than aircraft, Dade's aviation planners are looking to the 21st century. If all goes according to plan, South Florida will, by the mid-1970s, be the hub of supersonic aviation for the Americas. But time in which to solve today's crises at many of the nation's major airports has just about run out. And what little airspace is unoccupied this evening will tomorrow be devoured by an industry that has eclipsed even its own predictions. Meanwhile, those 130 million restless, impatient airline passengers are reluctantly learning to live with the jet age dilemma.
That's about it for this edition of Rewind. Just time to remind you that Rewind features historical film and video from the Lynn and Lewis Wolfson II Florida Moving Image Archives. To see more from the Wolfson Archives collections, visit our website, wolfsonarchives.org. You can search the archives catalog and watch video online. And be sure to connect to our YouTube channel, where you will find hundreds of carefully curated clips, or link to the Wolfson Archives Facebook page to keep up with our busy calendar of historical happenings. Until next time, I'm Rene Ramos. Thanks for watching.